Okay, so continuing with part 2 of the final Witchwood review, we're moving on to Paladin now, which have a lot of pretty interesting cards, one of which is Prince Liam. So this is a 5 mana, 5/5 legendary. Battlecry, transform all 1-cost cards, that include spells like secrets, in your deck into legendary minions. So the reason why this card is, well, I guess you could say good for what it does, is you can take a deck that would normally try to play a very tempo heavy game, like maybe you do have early game secrets or a lot of early game minions and 1-drops, but then if things are going to go to the late game, you can kind of try to switch strategies and say, okay, well, what if I just drew a bunch of legendary minions in the late game, and maybe that would be enough to carry some matchups. Maybe if you were doing kind of more of a mid-range deck, or just a deck where you have secrets that are good early on, but you don't want them really in the late game, then swapping those out for legendary minions could be okay. I don't think it's going to be a super powerful card. It's a lot like the original Elise the Trailblazer. I think that was the name of the card. Maybe that's the new one. Anyway, Elise, the first version, which was a 4 mana 3/5 Battlecry, put the map to the Golden Monkey, and when you got the Golden Monkey, it would change all minions in your hand and deck into legendary minions, and that was how old school Control Warriors won. So it's kind of similar to that, except this only hits the 1-cost cards, so maybe you still want some of the higher cost cards to be in the deck as those cards. A random legendary minion isn't always necessarily better than a card you actually put into your deck. In fact, usually it's not. It would only really be in the late game where those 1-cost cards become very useless, but if you do plan on going to the late game and maybe have 4 or 6 1-drops in your deck and it's like turn 5, maybe those 1-drops you don't want to draw them anymore. For instance, maybe you're playing a card like Firefly. Let's just say a hypothetical elemental paladin deck, never really a thing, but those Fireflies are 1/2s, really good at contesting the board early on, really useless when you get to the later stages of the game. Kind of the same with a lot of Paladin secrets. Like this new one over here, Hidden Wisdom, it's probably good for a while, drawing 2 cards, but maybe not the best to have at the end of the game, though you still might want it. It's kind of, you'd have to evaluate when the right time to play this card is for sure. It's interesting though. I think considering it's a 5/5 vanilla stats, you don't really need to get too much value from this effect for it to be worth it. It's just you have to be playing a deck where those 1-cost cards cease being useless as you go on. Secrets are a really obvious case for that. So next up is the Glass Knight, probably one of my favorite Paladin cards from this set. It's a 4 mana 4/3 Divine Shield. Whenever you restore health, gain Divine Shield. And the reason I like this card so much is I have been trying to make Healed in Paladin work quite a lot since around the Frozen Throne expansion, including Kobolds. But there's really just not enough support for it. Like, you can heal yourself, sure, but often you're already at 30 health, and if your opponent decides to trade for minions, then you're kind of screwed anyway. And if you do try to heal yourself, but you don't have enough board control, then you are equally screwed. But this is a really good board control card. Every time you can trade this minion in with a Divine Shield and pop one of their guys off the board, it's going to help you stabilize a lot. So it's a stabilization board control minion that synergizes well with healing effects. And I think that's the kind of thing that a healed in deck actually needs right now. Will this card single-handedly make the archetype viable? Probably not. But it's definitely an auto include in that kind of deck, and maybe you would just put it in a deck that has a couple healing effects like True Silver Champions. Doesn't really play to the archetype, but it does have some healing in the deck, so you might be able to get 2 Divine Shields. Even as a 4 mana 4/3 Divine Shield, that's not a bad minion. It's still pretty much going to get 2 minions traded for, unless it gets hero powered, of course. But overall pretty solid, but really good if you get a second Divine Shield. Next up, Cathedral Gargoyle. 2 mana 2/2. If you're holding a dragon, gain Taunt and Divine Shield. So it's a shielded mini bot that conditionally, a conditional shielded mini bot that will also come with Taunt. 2/2 Taunt Divine Shield is really hard to get through. So it is good in defensive decks and also pretty good in aggressive decks if you're playing Dragon Synergy. The problem is, as I understand it right now, that would be the only Paladin Dragon Synergy card at the moment. And I do not really see that being a thing at this point. Like, maybe when we go check out the neutral cards, there'll be one that I missed, but it doesn't really seem like Dragon Paladin is even close to being a thing, so maybe in a future set this will be good, but for right now it's just kind of a dead card. I would not disenchant it though. I would hold on to it, because if there is ever a Dragon Paladin, 100% this will be in the deck, because 2/2 Taunt Divine Shield sounds really good to me. Next up, Hidden Wisdom. It's an epic secret. 1 mana. After your opponent plays 3 cards in a turn, draw 2 cards. It's a little hard to evaluate without really putting it into practice, but I think your mum's... yeah. Okay. So, having your opponent play 3 cards in 1 turn is a little bit difficult. Often, if you're going up against a control deck, they'll play 1 card a turn, and it will usually be something like a big minion or a big board clear, so it'll be hard to get those extra 2 card draws. And if you're playing up against an aggro deck, I mean, for one thing, drawing too many cards isn't what you need against an aggro deck, and secondly, they might just play 2 cards a turn too. It might be several turns or even half the game until you get that 2 card draw. That said, 1 mana draw 2 cards is really good, and if your opponent knows you have this card, then they cannot actually play 3 cards in a turn without giving you that effect. It's actually really similar to the new Hunter Trap. Let's go back up and quickly talk about that a little more. After your opponent plays 3 cards in a turn, summon a 6/6 rat. It's obviously insane value, but it's a hard condition to meet. And then this secret is the same thing. I think it wouldn't be too bad to put in a deck just to have that limitation on your opponent. Like, if they do play 3 cards, then you're going to get a lot of value out of that, and that's not what they want. So they have to slow down in a way, and forcing your opponent to slow down might actually be good. Like, Doomsayer is really good at slowing the game down. If they can't kill the Doomsayer, then they can't develop on the turn, and they have to play slower than they otherwise would, which is really good for you as the control player. So it's worth mentioning. I think it's a decent secret, probably one of the better Paladin secrets. We'll just have to see if it's good enough to see play. So next up, Silver Sword. This card was really good in the reveal live stream. 8 mana, 3/4. After your hero attacks, give your minions +1/+1. At first glance, you might look at it and be like, wow, that is a crap weapon. It's a 8 mana, 3/4. What are you going to be able to actually trade that into to get value? And yeah, to a degree, 3 attack weapons at turn 8. There's not so many targets that you really need to kill off with that. But you could also play it aggressively, where you could just think of it as 12 damage over a few turns, and you buff up your minions. Maybe you're playing like a Silverhand Recruit or something like that style deck, and the +1s really add up. Like, you add the +1s, your opponent can't remove them, and then you get another wave of +1s on the following turn. If you think of it like playing Mark of the Lotus 4 times, that's actually pretty powerful. Mark of the Lotus was an insanely strong card in Aggro Druid. And this is just turn after turn of instant Mark of the Lotuses on top of a 3/4 weapon. It seems pretty solid overall. It won't be in all decks, but it's definitely a competitive option. Now, is it better than Vine Cleaver, which is 7 mana, I think it's 4/3, and then after your hero attacks, you get 2 1/1 tokens, 2 1/1 Silverhand Recruits. Pretty comparable. I think either are worth considering in that style of deck, though. And maybe there are some cards you put in your deck that benefit from having buffs, like this Paragon of Light. We'll talk about that one in a minute. So next up is Bellringer Sentry. 4 mana, 3/4, Battlecry, and Death Rattle. Put a secret from your deck into the battlefield. It's probably one of the strongest cards in the set. In a isolated box, of course. The problem is you have to play a secret deck, but getting 2 secrets is a lot of value on top of what's effectively like a 3-cost minion. So like a 3-cost minion that kind of gets you the value of 2 secrets from your deck. So it's like drawing and putting into play for free 2 secrets is a lot of value, and that's going to be really strong if the secrets are hey, keep the light on, please. Are going to be really strong if that's oh geez, I lost my train of thought. It's going to be really strong if secrets are worth playing. You could compare it to Mysterious Challenger, which single-handedly carried the secret Paladin archetype before. Is this as good as Mysterious Challenger? Well, it does come into play a little bit faster. A few of the good secrets have been rotated into standard, which were what you would have wanted to play in Mysterious Challenger decks. But, you know, maybe with Hidden Wisdom and a couple Redemptions or Repentances, it doesn't seem too bad. Also, Noble Sacrifice is also always a decent option. I think this is a pretty good card. Also thins the deck as well, that's worth mentioning. So, in some kind of reasonably aggressive deck, it could be pretty good. Now, you can't get away Coda with it in Standard, so I think that at the moment this is going to be more towards your aggro mid-range, but it seems very good overall. I like it a lot. So let's move on to Paragon of Light, which is 3 mana, 2/5. While this minion has 3 or more attack, it has Taunt and Lifesteal. So if you have Silver Sword, you swing with Paragon of Light on the board. This will become a 3/6 Taunt Lifesteal, which, worth mentioning, that is actually healing, so that does synergize with the Divine Shield of Glass Knight, where whenever you restore health, you gain Divine Shield. So maybe these 3 cards could make something like a healed in Paladin have some extra power and kind of push it towards being at least a playable deck. Maybe. Oh, I hope. Okay, so next up is Ghostly Charger, which is a 5 mana, 3/4 Divine Shield Rush. You could compare it a lot to the 6 mana minion, the Argent Crusader, which is 6 mana, 4/2 Charge Divine Shield. Now, Rush isn't as good as Charge, but usually I would want to use a charging Divine Shield minion to kill off a minion anyway, rather than going face. So this gives you like a lower mana cost, comparable, maybe arguably slightly better stats, without the ability to go face. So seems like a pretty good fast answer to whatever might be on the board. If you have a way to give it like extra stats, then you can maybe Ghostly Charger, Blessing of Kings, and then you have a 7/8. You charge that into a minion with the Divine Shield. It instantly kills off a big guy, and then you still have a 7/8 on the board. Doesn't seem too bad. Just a pretty solid minion. I don't know exactly where you would fit it in. Obviously really good in Arena too. Yeah, I just don't know exactly where it fits into any deck. It's just like a minion that's pretty solid, so it might be good enough to play in a lot of decks. But nothing really stands out to me as like, oh, this synergy is amazing. This is why you need to play Ghostly Charger. It's just a solid board control minion, and maybe that's good enough. So next is Rebuke, 2 mana. Enemy spells cost 5 more next turn. So this card is not terrible, but the problem is if your opponent has another play that doesn't revolve around spells, then you basically are doing like 2 mana do nothing. It's not like Lothab because it doesn't come with a 5/5 body for 5 mana on top of that. So like if you think of a 5 mana 5/5, especially back in the day when there were less cards to play with, that's almost like just a solid vanilla stat line, almost playable minion. But then like you get the enemy spells cost 5 more basically for free on top of that. So it's like 5 mana minion, and then you get the effect for free combined into 1 card. But this, you just pay 2 mana to get that effect. It might be like a one-of, like you know this is the turn where they have Flame Strike, so you play it and you screw your opponent over when you have a giant board that's really wide of a lot of minions that you want to protect from those AoE spells. So maybe at like high level play, this would see a little bit of play, protecting your board for that 1 extra turn you need to actually seal the deal. So it could be like you play this and it's very hard for your opponent to not die next turn, and that is a reasonable argument. But would you rather have that than just like the ability to refill the board up with like another minion based card again? Hard to say. Sound the Bells, so 2 mana, Echo buff, give a minion +1/+2. There's a few good ideas with this. One is that you can make minions like Paragon of Life, which revolve around having a buff, get a little bit better. Wow, that's loud. Basically making it have Taunt and Lifesteal, and then you can take the rest of the buff and you can put it on extra minions. It's going to be pretty good with Divine Shield minions, so anything that has a Divine Shield and you want extra attack to get a better trade on. It's just a good value card in general, in the sense that you can play it basically anytime in the game, a filler turn that just gets you a lot of stats. Also pretty good with, what's her name? The 7 mana Paladin minion from last set, where every buff you play that game also gets cast on her. So if you play Sound the Bells 5 times using Echo, then when that minion is played, it's going to get an extra 5/10 of stats. That's pretty good. I think this is a card that might see some play. It's got a lot of versatility. There's obviously the buff decks. Oh, you could try to play it in Quest Paladin as well, but you know, that's never really been a thing, so I don't know if that's enough to actually make that archetype work. But it does seem like a pretty solid card in general. So not too bad. Okay, Priest. Lady in White. OP. 6 mana, 5/5. Cast Inner Fire on every minion in your deck, which makes the attack equal to the health. Most Priest cards tend to have less attack than they do health, kind of catering towards the defensive archetype. Obviously, if you have something big that's like a 2/7 by default, and then you have Lady in the White, and that becomes a 7/7, that's really good, which is quite easy to do with Priest, because once again, a lot of Priest minions, especially the good ones, have a stat line something like a 4 mana 3/6. So then your 4 mana 3/6s become 4 mana 6/6s. It's like a much better version of the Mistcaller, which probably no one remembers. I think that was from GVG set. It sucked. It was a Shaman Legendary. It gave +1/+1 to every minion in your deck, but it was a 6 mana 4/4, and Inner Firing for like +3/+4 attack is better than that. So just a really solid card. Probably fits into just about any Priest deck that is minion based, I think. I expect it to see a lot of play for sure. Next up, Chameleos, 1 mana, 1/1. Each turn this is in your hand, transform it into a random card your opponent is holding. So there's 2 good things about this. One, your opponent's like game-winning card in a control versus control matchup, you can steal it from them and use it against them, which might be enough to actually churn the tides. So you just patiently hold it until you get the right card that you need. And in constructed, cards that your opponent are holding are going to be good, because obviously you only put good cards into your deck. So it's always going to turn into something that is at least useful for your opponent and probably going to have some use for you as well. But the other thing is that as turns go on, you hold it in your hand and you get an idea of exactly which cards your opponent is holding, and getting that information is actually a big deal. If you know your opponent has a big AoE, you're going to play around that AoE, and that might mean that you lose 1 or 2 less minions over the course of a game, simply because you had that information and you're playing around everything your opponent has. Also, will alert you to any big game-winning threats. Let's say you're up against a Warlock and they are playing Ren, which is the minion that allows you to get out the deck destruction guy. But like initially you might not know, is he playing Q block or is he playing a control Warlock? But once you get an idea of the cards in his hand, especially if you reveal that key card, then you know exactly what you're going up against and you know exactly how to play that game out. So I think in any kind of control based Priest deck, which is a lot of Priest decks honestly, well, not as much recently as, you know, in the past, but control Priest is usually something of a thing. But yeah, in a control slower Priest game where you're going to have 5 or 6 turns with Chameleos in your hand, it's going to get you a lot of information, and I think that makes it a really good card. Obviously, if you can't have a dead draw because you're going a very tempo-based deck, something like Spiteful Summoner Priest, then maybe you don't want Chameleos, because that first turn, I think it's just going to be a 1 mana 1/1, so you want to hold on to it till later. So not in tempo decks, but in control decks, very nice. Glittermoth, so 5 mana 4/4. If your deck has only odd cost cards, which remember the odd synergy back to the Moon Eater would make it a 4 health healing hero power. Double the health of your other minions. I don't really see how this synergizes really with Baku the Moon Eater. I guess you can still put Inner Fires in your deck, so you double the health of the minions on your field. It's kind of like a replacement for Divine Spirit, I guess. But it costs a lot more mana, and its base stat line kind of sucks. It's like barely good enough to put in a Baku deck, I guess, but it doesn't feel like that archetype will really be a thing. I will try it though, of course. I do love me some upgraded hero powers. Yeah, it's just, I don't think there's enough support for that kind of deck. I think it's going to fall short. So next up, Vivid Nightmare. 3 mana, choose a friendly minion, summon a copy of it with 1 health remaining. So it's pretty cool if you can get it on a big death rattle effect. So something like I think they call it the Splinter Tree, which is the new common 8 mana 4/4 death rattle, summon 2 2/2s, and those 2/2s death rattles into 1/1s. So overall it's like 7 minions and you get 14/14 of stats. It's a pretty terrible card, but if you could copy it for 3 mana, That's pretty good value. I mean, that's what happened in the live stream, by the way. But if you can find a better effect, something like a Silver Vanguard, then maybe you get turn 10, you play Silver Vanguard, you copy that minion, and as a result of that, you get a 3/3 and a 3/1 that will both Death Rattle into a 8-cost minion from your deck. But, well, would you want to do that in Big Priest? I mean, will Big Priest still be a thing? I know that Big Priest was losing a lot of pretty important cards, so I'm not sure about that. But obviously, if you have any Death Rattle effects, that's good with it. It's 1 health remaining, so if that minion originally had a lot of HP, you can benefit from like Circle of Healing, or this new card, Divine Hymn, restores 6 health to all friendly characters. Actually seems insane. Or you could just draw cards, like Northshire Cleric. So there's potential for this card. I think it is something that's worth experimenting with. Okay, Night Scale Matriarch. It's a dragon, so making up for the loss of cards like Dragon and Operative. Is it enough to make Dragon deck still a thing? I kind of doubt it, but we'll see. So 7 mana, 4/9. Whenever a friendly minion is healed, summon a 3/3 whelp. So if you want to play a lot of these healing cards, obviously getting 3/3 whelps is pretty good. 7 mana, 4/9 is a decent stat line to begin with. And it's any minion, so if you Circle of Healing and you have a big swing churn, you can actually get a lot of stuff going. Like, you could Night Scale Matriarch, Vivid Nightmare, and then Circle of Healing, and you would get 2 3/3 whelps because this effect would proc twice. Your second Night Scale Matriarch would heal up to a 4/5, and yeah, that would be pretty good. You get a 4/9, a 4/5, and 2 3/3s on 1 turn for 10 mana, and those Night Scale Matriarchs basically have to be removed because their effect is that powerful. Or else they basically lose the game next turn. So, seems like an okay play. Next up, Coffin Crasher, 6 mana, 6/5, Death Rattle, summon a Death Rattle minion from your hand. So, if you have some Death Rattles which are good, but cost way too much mana to play, something like Obsidian Statue, that becomes pretty good. Any card that allows you to cheat out a bigger minion from the hand seems to work pretty well, as things like Barnes have shown in the past, although that was technically from the deck. So you play Coffin Crasher, it's a decent body, you ram that into a minion, they both die, and then you get Obsidian Statue from your hand onto the field, and the game's pretty much over because I don't think any aggro deck can really get through that. Only question is, are they going to silence this? Are you actually going to be able to afford playing a 6 mana 6/5 and not die the turn afterwards? Do you have total control over the Death Rattles in your hand? Because it's a random Death Rattle, so you want to make sure you only have 1 or 2 really good Death Rattles to summon. You don't want to just like Coffin Crasher and then summon a Mistress of Mixtures or something stupid like that. I think Mistress of Mixtures rotated out too, if I'm not wrong. But yeah, you build a deck around this, and if you can, if you have a few Death Rattles that are really good, then maybe you do play that. And maybe Quest Priest, it's also worth considering there too. Next up, Holy Water. So deal 4 damage to a minion. If that kills it, add a copy of it to your hand. 5 mana, deal 4 is pretty weak overall. That's not very much damage. You can get a copy of whatever minion you want to destroy. If it's a really big legendary, like the finisher for like a Control Warrior or something, I don't know, Grimoire Hellscream, then maybe having a copy of that is really good in the late game. But that only makes it sound good in Control versus Control. Against aggro and mid-range, this sounds really bad because the tempo loss is too much, so I think this will solely be an arena card and not good enough to see constructed play. Quartz Elemental, 5 mana, 5/8, can't attack while damaged. So obviously this has some pretty good synergy with a healing-based deck, something with Divine Hymn or Squashling, because if you can heal it back up to full, then it can attack again, and a 5 mana, 5/8 is a really good stat line. And there are a lot of ways for a priest to heal stuff. You could also point out it does work with the Oddcast Baku deck. So you can heal for 4 for 2 mana, and maybe that puts it up to full. Maybe that is good enough for Baku to be good. And, you know, Glitter Moth, double the health of your Quartz Elemental, make it a 5/16, and then Divine Spirit it. No, Inner Fire it, right. Could be enough to make that kind of archetype work, but would you rather play that than just a standard Divine Spirit Inner Fire deck with like Twilight Drake? Doesn't seem better than that to me, yeah. but who knows. Just any deck that can heal it up, which is pretty much every priest, because that's your hero power, seems like a decent card to play. Elemental Priest could also be a thing. Live at the Sun Shard is still in there. Radiant Elementals are pretty good. Discover them off a Servant of Kalismos. I think that sounds pretty good to me. This is better than a Frozen Crusher for controlling the board, or just in general, because it doesn't freeze itself, and Frozen Crusher is 6 mana. So yeah, a better Frozen Crusher Elemental Priest. It's probably not competitive, but worth playing around with, I think. Okay, and this is the most OP card in the set. Well, no, not really, but it's really good for priests. 2 mana, Divine Hymn, restores 6 health to all friendly characters. I thought I said all characters before, but that means 6 healing for your hero, which if you took Greater Potion of Healing, which was 4 mana, heal your hero or heal a targeted friendly minion or friendly character for 12. That was 4 mana, so this is half the cost, half the effect on your hero, but you can also heal up your board, which makes it good for tempo as well. So if you have minions on board, so like Injured Blade Master, those are going to get buffed up, those are going to get healed up. If you have Quartz Elemental, that's going to get healed up. Nightscale Matriarch can proc, it keeps you alive because it's 6 health to your hero. It just seems like a really powerful card that can get you an insane amount of healing value for 2 mana. Probably the most powerful healing card, or healing spell at least, printed to date. I really like it. I think I will try to play it in a lot of different decks. Yes? Oh, okay. And finally, Squashling, which is 2 mana, 2/1 Echo. Battlecry, restore 2 health. So they were pointing out in the stream that you can use it to deal 2 damage to enemy minions if you use it in combination with Arcanized Soul Priest. Would also play if you have any other way of turning your healing effects into damaging effects. But, you know, overall it's not really that powerful. It's a Voodoo Doctor that costs double the mana, but you can play 5 times in a turn. Are healing effects really so strong that you would want to proc it over and over again? You could say like, oh, well, Nightscale Matriarch. But honestly, Squashling versus Circle of Healing, I think I'd rather just Circle of Healing. There's usually 3 or 4 targets that can get that healing effect to happen on the board. So why do you need to pay like 8 or 10 mana to heal when you could just play Circle of Healing? Or even better yet, Divine Hymn. I don't think this card makes the cut. There's not really any Echo synergy that priests have that really seems super great. So, like, you can try it. In Arena, it's okay. I think in Arena, any Echo card is okay, but Constructed, nah. Like 10 mana, summon 5, 2 1s, heal your hero for 10 health. I'd rather just have Divine Hymn. Like, not even comparable. Divine Hymn is way better. Okay, so I'm gonna take another break here. So we covered Paladin and Priest here. And in the last part of this video, we'll do Rogue, Shaman, Warlock, Warrior, and the neutral cards. So that'll be quite a mouthful to talk about. And that should be an hour or 2 from now. So until then, guys,